Should America celebrate Juneteenth Day? American school children have been taught that President Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves on January 1, 1863. However, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation only declared free slaves in the rebel states. There were 15 slave-holding states in January 1863. The proclamation applied to the 10 states that were in rebellion, the 10 states that were fighting a bloody war against the Lincoln-led government in Washington. Therefore, Lincoln's proclamation had to be enforced by the military. Slaves in the rebel states were freed when federal authority was reestablished in those rebellious states by military force. And African Americans played a major role in the military victory that resulted in their own liberation. African Americans who celebrate Juneteenth Day implicitly embrace the idea that the slaves were freed on January 1, 1863 without any effort of their own. Why do these celebrants accept as truth an inaccurate description of their own ancestors as inert recipients of freedom? Most of them value the importance of knowing their history. Would they continue to celebrate Juneteenth if they knew their history? And why don't they know their history? In a 1935 essay entitled The Propaganda of History, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote that influential European American scholars falsified the history of the Civil War in order to suppress the fact that the United States government, the Union, quote, had to call in the black men to save the Union, abolish slavery, and establish democracy, close quote. The success of the propaganda campaign that Du Bois identified resonates today in the attempts to make Juneteenth Day, June 19th, a national holiday. Over 30 states have made June 19th a state holiday, representing a major victory for the historians, or rather the propagandists, who deliberately falsified Civil War history to make African Americans appear to be inert recipients of freedom who did nothing to free themselves. The National Juneteenth Observance Foundation, NJOF, under the leadership of Ronald V. Myers, aggressively seeks to make June 19th a national holiday. Announcing that Nevada had become the 39th state to establish June 19th as a state holiday, NJOF explained the significance of Juneteenth. In this news release dated May 11th, 2011, the explanation reads, Juneteenth recognizes the day, June 19th, 1865, when Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, to read General Order No. 3, announcing all slaves are free through the issuing of the Emancipation Proclamation by President Abraham Lincoln. It took over 2.5 years for the news to reach Southwest Texas, the last geographic area in America where slavery was practiced, creating the oldest African American freedom celebration and America's second Independence Day. Let us closely examine the veracity of this statement and show how it lacks historical accuracy, and that its lack of historical accuracy aligns almost perfectly with the propaganda, or simply the lies, of those who have sought to suppress the history of how Americans of African descent freed themselves while saving the Union. NJOF states, it took over 2.5 years for the news of President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation to reach Southwest Texas. Clearly implied is that the enslaved in Southwest Texas were doing nothing to free themselves between January 1863 and June 1865. And clearly advanced is the description of the Negroes in Texas as woefully ignorant of events related to the bloody national debate. NJOF's statement is perfectly aligned with the deliberate lie of W.E. Woodward when he wrote, quote, the American Negroes are the only people in the history of the world, so far as I know, that ever became free without any effort of their own, close quote. to state that slaves in Texas did not get the news that they were freed until June 19, 1865, when Granger announced all slaves are free, is to assert that slaves in Texas and in all the states where the Emancipation Proclamation applied were freed without any effort of their own. Also, NJOF purports that Southwest Texas was the last geographic area in America where slavery was practiced, and that slavery came to an end there when General Granger read his order in Galveston, Texas on June 19, 1865. Galveston, however, is not in Southwest Texas. It is in Southeast Texas. The Union Army, under General Nathaniel P. Banks, captured Brownsville, Texas, which is in Southwest Texas, in November 1863. 5 African descent regiments took part in this Union victory that resulted in the Union Army occupying the southwestern tip of Texas for the duration of the war. These African American regiments became a part of the Union's occupation force in Southwest Texas from 1863 to 1865 and the end of the war. Another notable error in the NJOF press release is the claim that Southwest Texas was the last geographic area in America where slavery was practiced. Kentucky, Delaware, 12 parishes in Louisiana, and 7 counties in Virginia that were exempt from the Emancipation Proclamation were, in fact, the last geographic areas in America where slavery was practiced. In these geographic areas, slavery did not come to an end officially until December 1865, when the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified. NJOF also claims that Juneteenth is the oldest African American freedom celebration. However, based on events during the Civil War, Emancipation Day in the District of Columbia, April 16, 1862, was the first African American freedom celebration. Therefore, the oldest such celebration related to the Civil War. Without an appreciation of the facts related to emancipation, Ronald Myers and his foundation continues to lobby in hopes of establishing Juneteenth Day as a national holiday. The foundation's premise for Juneteenth is clearly false. The official explanation of the historical significance of the day is fictitious. Therefore, Myers and his foundation are attempting to legitimize false history. Unwittingly, this African American organization is suppressing the empowering story of how Americans of African descent freed themselves while saving the Union. This African American foundation enthusiastically makes it appear that African Americans are the only people in the history of the world that ever became free without any effort of their own. Myers and his foundation perpetuate the false assertions of Woodward and others who have sought to conceal the accurate story. Woodward was clearly a propagandist who lacked integrity, and Ronald Myers, as president of the NJOF, is unwittingly a Woodward disciple. The truth is that African Americans played a critical role in their own liberation, and this story needs to be told and celebrated. African American soldiers were instrumental in the Union Army gaining a stronghold in Southwest Texas in 1863. In capturing Charleston, South Carolina, the cradle of secession, on February 18, 1865. In capturing Richmond, Virginia, the capital of the Confederacy, on April 3, 1865. And in driving the Confederate governor of Texas and his army out of Texas into Mexico on June 15, 1865, 4 days before Granger arrived in Galveston. Without knowledge of such historical facts, thousands of conscious African Americans celebrate Juneteenth Day. Knowledge of the successful efforts of victorious African American freedom fighters in the Civil War compels us to reject the history presented by Woodward and his unwitting disciples. conscious men such as Myers are victims of a very successful propaganda campaign and are apparently unaware of the facts. Section 2 of the Nevada legislation calls on educators to advance the false statement that the last slaves in the United States were emancipated on June 19, 1865. Consequently, a lie has become law in Nevada. How has this happened in 39 states when the accurate history is easily accessible? It has happened because the propaganda campaign identified by Du Bois was successful in miseducating many conscious African Americans. And these African Americans have successfully institutionalized a lie that suppresses the accomplishments of their own ancestors. Du Bois wrote in his 1935 essay, The Propaganda of History, quote, "One has but to read the debates in Congress and state papers from Abraham Lincoln down to know that the decisive action which ended the Civil War was the emancipation and arming of the black slave. That, as Lincoln said, without the military help of the black freedmen, the war against the South could not have been won. The freemen, far from being the inert recipients of freedom at the hands of philanthropists, furnished 200,000 soldiers in the Civil War who took part in nearly 200 battles and skirmishes, and in addition, perhaps, 300,000 others as effective laborers and helpers." The victims, the miseducated, must be made aware of the truth. And after being exposed to the truth, they should cease and desist from advancing Woodward's lie by celebrating Juneteenth as the day when the last slaves were set free by someone in Washington. Certainly, informed and knowledgeable people should not celebrate the suppression of their own history. Juneteenth Day is a de facto celebration of such suppression. Americans, especially Americans of African descent, should not celebrate when the enslaved were freed by someone else, because that's not the accurate story. They should celebrate when the enslaved freed themselves by saving the Union. Such freedmen were heroes, not spectators. And their story is currently being suppressed by the advocates of the Juneteenth national holiday. The Emancipation Proclamation did not free the slaves. It made it legal for this disenfranchised, enslaved population to free themselves while maintaining the supremacy of the Constitution and preserving the Union. They became the heroes of the Republic. It is as Lincoln said, without the military help of the black freedmen, the war against the South could not have been won. That's worth celebrating. That's worth telling the story of how Americans of African descent helped save the Union and freed themselves. Let's celebrate the truth, a glorious history, a story of a glorious march to liberty. Thank you.